My husband's secret. A story of betrayal and a mother's fight. I found tampons in my husband's car, and honestly, I wished he'd been cheating. At least then my kids wouldn't have had to go through this mess. I'm 29, he's 30. We've been together 7 years, married 4. I never had a single reason to suspect he was unfaithful, or even unhappy with our marriage. He always joked we were still in the honeymoon phase, nearly 5 years and 2 kids later. I believed him until last month. I was buckling our daughter into her car seat when I spotted something tucked between the cushions. I figured it was just a toy or a wrapper, so I reached for it. My fingers closed around a familiar cylindrical shape, a tampon. Confusion washed over me. I pulled it out, the bright wrapper glaring against the car's upholstery. This wouldn't have been a big deal, except I've had an IUD for a year, so no period. And I didn't recognize the brand. It was one I'd never used. Small detail, but my stomach nodded. That evening, I showed him, still holding it like a piece of evidence. Just stared, genuinely confused. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked, his brow furrowed. I took a deep breath. "I found it in your car, between the cushions. It's not mine. I haven't had a period in over a year, remember?" His face remained blank for a moment before recognition flickered. He shrugged. "Probably belonged to Fiona, my coworker." His confusion quickly turned to dismissiveness. "Probably Fiona," he repeated, shrugging again and turning back to his phone. "Ma, she must have dropped it when we went out for lunch the other day." I watched him, waiting for him to understand why this bothered me. Nothing. No apology, no concern, just a casual dismissal. It was like it was no big deal and I was overreacting. It felt like a slap in the face. It made me question everything. My husband often carpools with coworkers for lunch. Fiona and her husband are close friends of ours. I'd never thought twice about him carpooling with her. They're friends, and sharing rides for lunch was common. Even socialized as couples, barbecues, movie nights. Fiona and I had bonded over balancing work and family. Our kids played together while we chatted about everything from office gossip to personal topics. It made sense that a tampon could have slipped out of her purse. No big deal, right? Maybe it fell out when she was grabbing her phone or wallet. Just a harmless accident. I brushed it off, convincing myself there was no need to worry. Our friendship with Fiona and her husband was solid. I pushed the unsettling discovery to the back of my mind, determined not to let a small incident cause drama. I forgot about it until dinner with Fiona and her husband a few weeks later. I wanted to believe my husband, but I couldn't shake the way the tampon had been tucked into the seat or his complete disregard for it. Maybe he was playing dumb, I don't know. I did something that now feels kind of crazy. I faked an emergency and asked Fiona if she had any tampons. She handed me one, almost identical to the one I'd found. I breathed a sigh of relief. So, the tampon in the car was likely the same one, and there was probably an innocent explanation. I thought I'd seen the last of the out-of-place feminine hygiene products until this morning. I found another tampon. This time, in my sock drawer. I feel physically ill. The thought of my husband having an affair makes me sick, and even more so if the woman left these for me to find. If it was Fiona, why would she give herself away by offering me one the other night? In any other situation, I'd talk to my husband, but I feel too sick and embarrassed to approach him. Contemplating the source of these 2 tampons has been my personal hell for weeks. The truth unveiled shortly after my initial post. I told my sister what happened. The tampons, my husband's cluelessness, the one from Fiona, and all my suspicions. We compared tampons, except the back seat one, which I'd already thrown out, and they were a match, just different absorbencies. I hadn't left either where my husband or daughters could have found them. My daughters didn't even know what they were. My sister was convinced it was Fiona, either messing with my husband with me, or both. Direct confrontation still seemed like a bad idea, so she suggested inviting Fiona and her husband over for our Labor Day barbecue. Unfortunately, they already had plans. My sister and I agreed it was too soon for cameras without more evidence, so we waited. We watched my husband for any changed behavior. There was none. Checked our house for misplaced items. None. Even the girls, for any new friends. My brother-in-law was adamant on this last point. He partly believed the tampons were harmless. Said if anything was happening in or around our home, it would be impossible to hide from me and the girls. Since my husband took them to and from daycare and most activities, I found some comfort in that. I didn't feel differently until last week, when my younger daughter, who's 2, got sick. I wanted to stay home, but my husband insisted I stay at work while he took care of her. I was okay with that. My sister and her husband thought it was a good sign that he'd take time off at a moment's notice. We were all starting to put the tampon fiasco behind us. By the 3rd or 4th day, I was just happy to see a nearly healthy child and a helpful husband. Toward the end of that week, I came home to something strange. The toddler I'd left that morning in an old PJ set was now dressed in a onesie I'd never seen, with a tiny clip in her hair. My memory isn't perfect, but I know what my kids wear. I'd sworn off full-length sleep suits with snaps across the front long before our second child. The long snaps are a pain and inefficient for diaper changes. I just wouldn't dress her in something like that, and my husband knows it. He doesn't buy or accessorize the girls' clothes, so I was bewildered and floored at the thought of someone else being around our sick child without my knowledge. I went straight to my husband. Had anyone been over? He seemed confused, like before, and asked why I'd think that. He said it had just been him and the kids all day. I asked again if anyone had even stopped by, and he denied it, telling me to calm down. I might have lashed out right then, but our older daughter was in the room and sensed something was up. In a calmer voice, I asked him a 3rd time if anyone had been around our children. He swore they hadn't been around anyone but him. He also denied buying new clothes or doing anyone's hair. With our daughter in the room and my emotions all over the place, I decided to leave it. I couldn't make sense of it then, and it hardly seems clearer now, after driving myself half crazy with explanations that don't add up. The breaking point, after nearly losing my mind over a hair clip in a onesie. I realized accusations and guesswork weren't getting me anywhere. I'd become so absorbed in the paranoia that I wasn't sleeping, eating, or caring for my kids properly. And I wasn't getting answers. So I decided to pull the trigger on hidden cameras, shipping them to my sister's house, with my brother-in-law agreeing to help with the installation. Before the cameras even arrived, I got my long-awaited confirmation last week. The day started like any other busy weekday morning. My husband and I rushed to get our energetic daughters into their uniforms, trying to grab a quick bite ourselves. Despite the chaos, there was a sense of teamwork. After dropping the girls off, my husband and I went to work, counting down until we could reunite with our little ones. But a strange feeling lingered, intensifying when I got a ring notification at work, motion at the front door. I clicked the video, half expecting a delivery person or neighbor. What I saw stunned me. On my doorstep was a young woman leading my daughter into the house, hand in hand with my husband and other daughter close behind. My heart hammered. The girls were supposed to be in daycare, my husband at work. The woman, as far as I knew, was living 2 states away with a court order keeping her there. Yet here she was, in our home, with my husband and children. Panic washed over me. Was this a mistake? A misunderstanding? Or something more sinister? A knot formed in my stomach as I realized the answers might be far more troubling than I imagined. I stared at the screen in disbelief, blood pounding in my ears. The ring footage showed a nightmare. A woman I hadn't seen in years leading my youngest daughter into our home, hand in hand, with my husband and older daughter behind them. My sister-in-law. Shock rendered me speechless. How could this be happening? The girls were at daycare, my husband at work, desperate for a mistake, an innocent explanation. But as reality sank in, anger surged. With trembling fingers, I dialed my husband. No answer. I texted him. Even in his stupidity, he probably realized he'd messed up by using the front door, knew I'd get the notification, and wanted to delay the inevitable. The 5th or 6th call he finally picked up. The woman on camera was my husband's sister. She was the likely source of both tampons, the onesie, and the hair clip. She's also a registered individual with a history of abuse, a recovering addict who spent years coercing the silence of another one of my husband's family members after she had abused them. I hadn't seen or heard from her in years, and from the way my husband talked, I didn't expect to. But here she was, in our house, with our children. It wasn't just the shock of seeing her. It was the realization of what her presence meant. Sister-in-law, fresh off another rehab stint, was the last person I expected to find sneaking into our lives. The gravity of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't about a random tampon or a harmless mistake. This was about deep deception and betrayal. Suffice to say, I was livid. It wasn't an affair, but somehow knowing who it was and why was infinitely more disgusting. Apparently, my sister-in-law wanted to reconnect and make amends with people she'd hurt, and my husband was high on that list. The irony of her attempts at reconciliation through deceit and intrusion was not lost on me. My husband didn't want me to know, or worse, he was trying to keep our children from her. So they'd been meeting in secret often at our house when I was at work. They'd enter through the garage in his car so the Ring camera wouldn't tip me off. The level of planning and secrecy made my skin crawl. She spent the night on a weekend. I was on a business trip and slept in our bed. The very thought of her in our home and our bed made me feel violated. She babysat our girls on a night my husband told me he'd dropped them off at his parents'. The casual way he'd lied, the ease with which he'd kept this secret made me question everything I thought I knew about him. She bought the girls' clothes and dressed my youngest in the onesie. About my husband had sworn his life I had dressed her and myself. The image of my daughter in that unfamiliar outfit, a tiny clip in her hair, now felt like a haunting reminder of the betrayal unfolding right under my nose. The aftermath end yet. When I turned to my husband for reassurance, for a glimmer of hope, all I found was disbelief and denial. He brushed off my concerns with a casual shrug, insisting it was all in my head, that I was overreacting to harmless coincidences. He swore it was all in my head, the tampons, the onesie, the bow, everything. He was perfectly content to watch me agonize for weeks over a woman he insisted didn't exist. Shrugging off each unsettling discovery like it was news to him and telling me I was being irrational, he insinuated I was experiencing postpartum depression 2 years after I'd given birth. 4 years earlier, I'd told him one of my biggest fears for motherhood was PPD, like my mother had with me. Not being present for our babies and being left with guilt and regret as they grew older. But as weeks stretched into months and the truth remained stubbornly elusive, my patience wore thin, replaced by a simmering rage. How could he dismiss my fears so callously, to gaslight me into doubting my own sanity? How could he stand idly by as our family teetered on the brink of collapse? He told me I wasn't sleeping enough, that I missed the girls too much, that I needed to reevaluate my mental health. I gave him the benefit of the doubt because he was my husband and no other version of events made sense. Now, after a month of this mind game, I have nothing to show for my trust but this pathetic situation and a lot of anger. My husband failed to explain himself when confronted. He stammered, offering half-hearted, nonsensical excuses. He muttered about protecting me from stress, about his sister just wanting to make amends. But his words were disjointed, unconvincing. Each excuse was more implausible than the last, a desperate attempt to cover the truth. His evasiveness only confirmed my worst fears. The man I had trusted was now a stranger hiding behind lies. I watched him avoid eye contact, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The weight of his betrayal hung heavy in the air. There was no reasonable explanation for his actions or the deceit that tainted our marriage. Every time he opened his mouth, I saw the panic in his eyes, the realization he'd been caught. His silence on certain points spoke louder than any words, revealing the depth of his dishonesty. I knew then that I couldn't stay with someone who had so blatantly betrayed my trust and jeopardized our children's safety. The thought of my daughters being exposed to such toxic secrecy and manipulation was unbearable. I had to prioritize their well-being, and that meant making the hardest decision of my life. With a heavy heart, I told him it was over. The look of shock and desperation on his face was almost pitiable, but it couldn't erase the damage. I walked away, determined to protect my children from further harm. I decided to end the relationship and file for divorce. The decision was both heartbreaking and empowering. It was devastating to acknowledge that our 7-year journey had ended so bitterly, but But it was also liberating to take control of my life and prioritize my well-being, my children's. The divorce process was long and grueling. Each step felt like a new battle in an endless war. Countless court sessions, each more draining than the last, where I had to relive the pain and betrayal. My husband fought me every step of the way, refusing to take responsibility, trying to paint himself as the victim. His determination to contest every detail made it even more exhausting. In court, I detailed finding the tampons, the hidden meetings with my sister-in-law and my husband's lies. I showed the ring footage of her entering our home with my children and provided testimonies from my sister and brother-in-law. However, the court needed more than assumptions about my sister-in-law's character. They needed concrete evidence of her past and present behavior, which was hard to obtain. Despite these challenges, I focused on the bigger picture. I emphasized my husband's deceit and the breach of trust, which were undeniable. The court recognized the complexity and emotional turmoil it caused. After months of legal battles, the court ruled in my favor. I was granted primary custody of our daughters, with my husband receiving supervised visitation rights. The judge acknowledged the need for a stable environment for the children. Considering the deceit and potential risks involved, looking back, this ordeal taught me several valuable lessons. Trust is the foundation of any relationship, and once broken, it's incredibly difficult to rebuild. Always listen to your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. Communication is key. Address issues head-on rather than letting them fester. Most importantly, never settle for less than you deserve. My children and I deserve a life free from deception and betrayal, and I am committed to building that future. For us, what are your thoughts on this story? Let me know in the comments below. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do, and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories.